The Battle of Okinawa, 1945. The Battle of Okinawa started on the 23rd of March, 1945, with all major combat operations ended on the 23rd of June that same year. The challenge faced by the American military was the Japanese's willingness to fight to the bitter end. More mental health issues arose from the Battle of Okinawa than in any other battle in the Pacific during World War II. The constant bombardment from artillery and mortars, coupled with the high casualty rates, led to a great deal of men coming down with what we call and are known as combat fatigue. Morale was dangerously low by the end of May, and the state of discipline on a morale basis had a new low barometer for acceptable behavior. Japanese soldiers used Okinawan people as human shields, which tormented the Americans. The small unit leadership was exemplified in its superior performance and capability by the 24 Medals of Honor awarded for heroism during the Battle of Okinawa. The bombardment of Okinawa commenced on the 23rd and lasted until the morning of the land invasion on April 1st. The objectives were split between the Army and the Marine Corps divisions. The Marine divisions would take the northern 3/4 of the island, while the Army divisions would take the more strategically significant southern quarter that held the island's capital and the majority of the airfields. The landing on April 1st, which was Easter Sunday and April Fool's Day, went almost completely unopposed, as did the next several days. April 12th, 1945. President Roosevelt dies in Warm Springs, Georgia, and Vice President Harry Truman takes the oath of office as president. There was minimal resistance for the Marines, who completed taking their objectives to the north on the 20th of April. The Marines faced only sporadic resistance during this period and spent most of their time and effort easing the concerns of the Okinawan citizens, who were indoctrinated into the belief that the Americans would torture and murder them. Every ridge honeycombed with defensive positions, allowing the Japanese to always hold high ground. There were piles of dead bodies at the bottom of every hill. And on the 23rd of June, all major combat operations ended on the island of Okinawa. 12,000 American service members were killed and more than 38,000 wounded, many from combat fatigue, or they were simply missing. The Japanese military lost more than 110,000, but the greatest loss of life by the Okinawan people. Anywhere from 40,000 to 150,000 of the Okinawans perished during the battle. It was at Okinawa that the largest number of Japanese soldiers were taken prisoner, more than 7,000. The Battle of Okinawa had a dramatic effect not only on the Pacific Campaign, but on the nature of warfare to this day. The greatest effect Okinawa had on the Pacific Campaign was to convince the recently seated President, Harry S. Truman, to take any avenue to end the war outside of sending an invasion force onto mainland Japan. Unfortunately, the firebombing the country was not adequate to convince the Japanese to surrender. July 29, 1945. President Harry S. Truman warns that the country would be destroyed if it does not surrender unconditionally, and Japan continues fighting. The concept of conceding was one of the Japanese simply could not fathom. Admitting defeat without being completely subdued by their adversary was unconscionable to the Japanese. This was all too apparent to President Truman, who said, "I do not want another Okinawa from one end of Japan." The Battle of Okinawa, or from one end of Japan to the other. This sentiment is what led to the approval of the atomic bomb, Little Boy, being dropped on Hiroshima on the 6th of August. Even with the resulting vast destruction and killing of up to 140,000 people, the Japanese were still not willing to surrender or concede. On August 9th, 1945, after getting no response from the Japanese government, after the Hiroshima bombing, a second atomic bomb, nicknamed Fat Man, is dropped on Nagasaki. It killed up to 80,000 people. The war cabinet was divided even after Fat Man was dropped at Nagasaki on the 9th of August. It still took negotiating to determine the status of Japan's surrender, which unofficially took place on the 14th of August, where they compromised that Emperor Hirohito could maintain his seat as emperor so long as he followed the orders and the directions of the Supreme Allied Commander, General Douglas MacArthur. And on September 2nd, 1945, Japan signs the formal surrender aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay.